Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling something I think a lot of sports fans have probably thought about at one point or another.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's this question of whether college athletes are being taken advantage of, with all the money in college sports.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got this guide we're going to be looking at today. It's all about how to create a viral, like a YouTube podcast series
Yeah.
about this very topic.
Interesting.
So our goal today is to really get to the bottom of the arguments and look at the evidence and try to do it without either of us getting totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's a big topic.
It's a big topic and a lot of different angles to look at.
Exactly. And we want to make sure it's digestible for everybody listening.
Absolutely. What we want to do is sort of give everyone a pathway through the topic using this guide as our roadmap.
Okay. Sounds good. So the guide actually starts with something that I think is pretty powerful.
Okay.
It throws out this fact. College athletes generate billions of dollars for the NCAA, yet they haven't traditionally been directly paid to play.
Right.
I mean, that right there kind of sums up the whole tension of what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
it really does. That contrast between just the massive scale of money in college sports and the way the athletes are compensated or not compensated.
Right.
It's really the heart of the matter.
So let's dig into that a bit. Where does all this money even come from?
Yeah. Good question.
Luckily, this guide actually breaks that down for us.
Okay.
So it talks about, those huge TV deals we all see,
Yeah.
March Madness.
Yeah, March Madness huge.
Sponsorships, plastered all over the place.
All over the stadium.
Jerseys, stadiums everywhere.
On the uniforms.
And then obviously ticket sales for these, massive stadiums.
Yeah.
So we're talking an enormous amount of revenue here.
Enormous. Yeah, this isn't just a few bake sales. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you see these huge numbers, it really makes you think about, okay,
Yeah.
how did this system even come to be?
Right.
Why are we in a situation where there's so much money being made, but the athletes themselves aren't getting a direct cut?
Yeah. Why hasn't it evolved in a way that, they see some of that revenue that they're helping to generate?
Which brings us to, how athletes are actually compensated.
Right.
And for
Right.
the longest time, the main way they've been compensated is through scholarships,
Right.
which, can be incredibly valuable.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about tuition room and board covered.
It's a huge leg up.
But it's not the same as a paycheck.
No, it's not.
And this all kind of revolves around this idea of amateurism.
Right. Amateurism.
Can you kind of unpack that a bit further?
Sure. So the concept of amateurism was originally meant to, separate college sports from the pros.
Okay.
The idea was these were student athletes competing for the love of the game, not for, a big paycheck.
Right, right.
But then as college sports became this huge commercial thing, that line got a lot blurrier. And it raises these questions about whether, is that idea of amateurism even relevant anymore when we're talking about billions of dollars?
It feels like a concept that's maybe been stretched a bit too far.
Yeah, I think it has.
Now, this guide really emphasizes how important it is to actually hear from the athletes themselves, to understand the whole picture of, whether they're being exploited.
Right.
And it stresses that a really crucial element of this conversation is including stories of athletes facing financial struggles.
Right.
Or, maybe even feeling mistreated by the system.
Yeah.
Now, this particular guide doesn't dive into specific stories, but it does highlight the type of content that would be important to include in like a full podcast series about this topic.
Right.
So even though we don't have those specific stories in front of us right now,
Yeah.
it's important to kind of acknowledge that those kinds of stories exist and that they're a big part of this whole debate.
It's important for the listener to understand the types of situations that fuel this exploitation debate. We're talking about athletes who might be on full scholarship but still struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't afford to travel home to see their family.
Right.
Or even just, having enough food outside of what the university dining hall provides.
Yeah, makes sense. So those are the sorts of things that we should be keeping in mind.
Exactly. It's about the human impact.
Right, the human impact.
Now, one thing that has changed recently is the introduction of NIL policies.
Oh, yeah, NIL, name, image, and likeness.
Exactly.
So for anyone who isn't familiar with this, can you explain what NIL is all about and how it's changed things?
Sure. So NIL policies basically allow college athletes to earn money from things like endorsements and sponsorships.
Okay.
So, an athlete can now get paid to promote a local business on their social media or sign an autograph deal.
Okay.
things that were totally against the rules just a few years ago.
So it's a big shift.
It's a huge change. It recognizes that athletes have value beyond just their performance on the field.
So on the surface, that sounds like a good thing. Yeah, definitely.
Athletes can finally make some money while they're in college.
Mm-hmm.
But has it really solved the problem of exploitation?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
NIL has definitely opened up opportunities for a lot of athletes.
Yeah.
Especially those in the big sports.
Right.
Or with, huge social media followings.
Right.
But it hasn't really fixed everything.
I see.
There are still concerns about equity.
Yeah.
Are these opportunities available to all athletes or just a select few?
Right.
And does getting paid for endorsements really change that basic question of whether athletes should be compensated for, their athletic performance that makes all this money for the NCAA and the universities?
Yeah, you have a good point.
It's a complicated picture.
It sounds like NIL is a step in the right direction, but maybe not the complete solution.
Exactly.
Now, something else that's important to acknowledge is that there are different points of view on all of this.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Some people think that the traditional system, or even the current system with NIL, is actually fair.
So even though our source today doesn't really get into those arguments specifically, what are some of the things that people say to defend the way things are or the way things were?
Well, a lot of times people will point to the value of that athletic scholarship.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about tuition and fees, room and board,
Yeah.
sometimes even a stipend for other expenses.
Yeah.
That's a significant financial package.
For sure.
Especially at those, pricier private universities.
Right.
Another argument is that the real focus of college athletics should be education and personal growth.
Right.
And treating athletes like paid employees could change that that dynamic in a negative way.
Mhm.
And some people will also say that the universities provide, amazing resources.
Yeah.
Top-notch coaching, incredible training facilities, academic support.
Right.
They argue that those are significant benefits that the athletes get in exchange for their participation.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So there are definitely different ways to look at it.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to, consider those different perspectives.
It's never a simple issue with one right answer.
Right.
Understanding those different viewpoints is so important.
So as we've been going through all of this, you're talking about the money in college sports, the whole issue of how athletes are compensated, the possibility of exploitation, the impact of NIL, and even those counter-arguments. What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that tension, that push and pull between the ideal of amateurism and the reality that college sports is a huge business.
Right.
I mean, the amount of money involved really highlights that these athletes are major contributors to the system that makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that naturally leads to the question, is it fair how they're being compensated?
Makes sense.
And NIL has definitely changed things,
Mm-hmm.
but it hasn't erased those fundamental questions about, the relationship between the athletes, the NCAA, and the universities.
So why should all of this matter to you, the listener?
Well, if you're someone who cares about, what's going on in the world around you,
Right.
understanding these dynamics of college sports and the whole debate over exploitation is just becoming more and more important.
I see.
It touches on these bigger issues about labor and economics and social justice.
Right.
Plus, college athletics is always changing.
Yeah. Always something new.
There are lawsuits, there are new rules being made all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So having a good understanding of, what's at stake
Right.
will help make sense of what happens in the future.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the question of whether college athletes are being exploited,
Yeah,
let's just revisit that central tension one more time.
sure. At its heart, this whole debate is about this. College sports brings in tons of money, billions of dollars every year.
Right.
But the athletes whose talent and hard work are the reason for all that money
Yeah.
haven't traditionally been paid directly for their play.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings up those questions about fairness and exploitation.
So to leave you with something to think about, something inspired by this guide's focus on really engaging in this conversation,
Okay.
I want you to think about everyone involved in college sports, the athletes themselves, the NCAA, the universities, and even us, the fans who watch and buy merchandise.
Yeah.
What do you think would make this system truly fair?
Mm.
How can we keep those traditions of college sports alive
Yeah.
while also being realistic about the money involved and the rights of the athletes?
Right.
It's a tough question with a lot of angles.
A lot of moving parts for sure.
Thanks for diving deep with us, everyone.
Thanks for listening.